Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Ashley Solesbee. I'm the education coordinator here at the FullFrame Documentary Film Festival. I'm super excited to be here with you today for the next hour to explore documentary film in the classroom. We are here in partnership with PBS POV and we're so grateful for their support. So thanks again for joining us. It's an honor to be here. And if we're good, we can go ahead and dive into some objectives and goals for our time together today. Cool. So we want to try and increase educator or teacher awareness of our FullFrame education programs, which we're so proud of and we're so excited to share with all of you today. We want to also shift our perspective as teachers on what documentary film might look like in your classrooms. And maybe just talk through the stigma that surrounds playing a movie in class and how to beat that. We also want to talk a bit about the Bloom's Taxonomy model for learning as a means of integrating documentary film to incite those critical thinking skills in our students. So we'll spend some time on Bloom's today. And then we're going to take a look at some really fantastic documentary film resources that PBS's POV documentary program has and explore how to best utilize those in your classroom. And then finally, we're hopeful that we'll inspire you today to create something for your own students, whether that be a lesson plan around a clip from a documentary film or a full-length feature film surrounding a unit plan. The possibilities are really endless. So yeah, those are our objectives and goals for today. And I think we're ready to move forward. Cool, so just an introduction so you kind of know who you're hanging out with for the next hour. Again, my name is Ashley. This is my 12th year in education, which is crazy to say, but it's true. I'm a full-time teacher here in Durham Public Schools in Durham, North Carolina. I currently run our AIG, or Gifted and Talented / Advanced Academics program out at Neal Middle School. And prior to that, I taught middle school level language arts for about 8 or 9 years down in South Carolina and then for a bit here in Durham as well. Right now I teach an elective class for our high ability or gifted learners that focuses on building social and emotional skills in those students, but also seeks to enrich and extend grade level curriculum. So documentary film is a huge part of what we do and what my students love, and I'm excited to share all of that with you today. I got started with FullFrame back in 2014. It was my first year here in Durham, and I applied for our teacher professional development program, which is called Teach the Teachers, and I was accepted, and the whole experience just sort of transformed my practice as an educator and just really changed the way that I saw film and the power of film in a classroom. And I'll speak more about that as we kind of dive into these programs together today. I then went on to be asked to lead Teach the Teachers in 2015 and 2016. I just didn't want to leave FullFrame. I fell in love really fast and really hard. And then I was fortunate enough that our wonderful festival director, Deirdre, wanted to expand and grow our education programs and let me come on part-time as the education coordinator for the festival. So now I manage all of our education programs. And I teach full-time. It's a really good life. You can, yeah. So a little bit about FullFrame, if you're not familiar. We are an annual international event that shows over 100 films every year. The city is sort of overrun with filmmakers during the festival. There are wonderful films. We also have lots of discussions and panels. And then, of course, plenty of Southern hospitality, which is never in short supply around these parts. Our program is associated with the Center for Documentary Studies in Duke University. And then the thing that I'm most proud of as a public school teacher is that FullFrame is the only documentary film festival with a dedicated education program that serves teachers and students in public schools. So I think that really sets us apart, and I'm super proud to be part of this team. So we're going to dive in a bit to the education programs. I just want to kind of give you an overview of what our education department looks like. First is our youth screening, which is coming up in just a few weeks. Our youth screening is a totally free field trip. I'm going to say that again because it just never happens in public ed, but it is totally free. Field trip for Durham Public School students and teachers. The tickets are free. FullFrame will even reimburse transportation costs for our schools that maybe can't afford to bus our kids out to the theater. And that screening takes place at the Carolina Theater, which is a beautiful historic old theater in downtown Durham. It's my favorite building in the city. And we screen a documentary. The teachers and students get resources built by FullFrame, and this year in partnership with PBS and POV, and they get to experience a documentary film in one of the most beautiful theaters, I think, in the country. So that's coming up in just a couple weeks. Can't even believe that. We actually set some records this year. We sold it out in 3 days. So we're really proud of our youth screening and the difference that makes for our students and our teachers here in Durham. The second program, which is the one that is most near and dear to my teacher heart, is Teach the Teachers. This is our public school teacher professional development program that's associated with our festival. Each year, our applications for the program open in about February, and we select a cohort of public school teachers to come to the festival for free. And then we sort of teach them documentary film integration by immersing them in the festival and also in John Golden's book, Reading in the Real World, which I'll speak about in just a few minutes. But the book sort of provides strategies and resources that serve as kind of a complement to them immersing themselves in all of the documentary films. And we just always pull this really incredible group of educators, and I think it's most special to me because it's how I started, and it's just such a wonderful gift. Like, as a public school teacher myself, a lot of times professional development might have wonderful intentions, but it just doesn't do what you want it to do. And I can say with certainty that Teach the Teachers does what you need it to do. It's just refreshing and rejuvenating for teachers. So then our third one is our School of Doc. School of Doc is our 5-week summer program for Durham Public School high school students. It is also totally free, which is kind of unheard of. There are not a lot of free summer opportunities, especially not of this caliber. Our students come from all over Durham, and they are taught by 2 professional filmmakers, which were Todd Tinkham and Eric Barstow, both incredibly talented and experienced professionals in the industry, actively working in the industry. And they sort of take this group of students under their wing. Most of our students come to us with little to no experience, and they leave as filmmakers. They create 2 short projects, and they kind of learn filmmaking by filmmaking, which is super powerful to witness. And then they build a project around a nonprofit in the city. That final project is their film, their final film, and then that gets screened at the following year's festival. So the kids get to come back and experience the festival, not just as students, but now as filmmakers, which is pretty incredible to see that transformation. They screen the film at our youth screening, and the Q&A that follows, where those kids are being asked questions as filmmakers and answering questions as filmmakers. It's just really incredible to see. So that's School of Doc. Okay. So we're going to kind of spend some time today on the Teach the Teachers methodology, which again, as I mentioned, our curriculum is rooted in John Golden's book, Reading in the Real World. And it's a wonderful text that really does an awesome job of sort of exposing teachers to this idea of changing our perspective on what we think film can do in a classroom. There is a stigma around showing film in a classroom. Like, I've dealt with that myself, I'm sure you have as well, where administrators come in and kids are just watching a movie. Like, what could they actually be doing? What are they actually learning? And how do you prove that, right? So Reading in the Real World really gives some tangible, strong strategies that can, I think, help sort of change that perspective around what it means to show a film in class. And the big idea here is that we have to change how we look at doc film, and we need to see it as a piece of nonfiction text that, for me, feels very much alive and relevant and powerful for our kids, just in a way that textbooks just don't. So when we change that perspective and we approach documentary film the same way that you would approach teaching really hard text, a lot changes, right? The places that we can go with students totally transform. So when we take our teachers from Teach the Teachers through this methodology and through this curriculum, we really focus on changing the way they're viewing film. So we want them to see film as text. We want them to see it as live and dynamic, and capable of inciting these really powerful critical thinking skills. That's learning, and that's what we as educators are about. So during Teach the Teachers, we basically, you choose your films and you go and you screen these films, and then afterwards we come together, we grab dinner together or coffee, and then we talk together about some strategies that we might use to include those films in our classrooms. So instead of it being the kind of professional development where you sit and are talked at via PowerPoint or just handed a packet of information and then sent on your merry teacher way, you're immersed in this stuff, right? You live it. And when you live it, it's easy for you to see how it would come alive with students in your classroom. And I think that's the power of Teach the Teachers, is that our teachers are immersed in this, just like we want to immerse our students in those films. So I think when that happens, it helps us sort of get our teachers to shift their perspective on how documentary film might be used in their classrooms. So what we're going to do now is talk about how you guys might apply this methodology and curriculum in your own classroom. And to do that, we really, again, have to talk about film as text and just change this perspective, right? It's not that we're showing a movie, it's that we are teaching this really alive, complex, transformative text that is documentary film. To do that, for me, it really required me to tap into Bloom's taxonomy. Me and Bloom's go way back, and I'll just tell this story as a side note because I think it's powerful here. When I was teaching language arts several years ago, I had my first group of honors students, or gifted kids, and I was just told repeatedly by leadership in my building, who I loved and were very supportive, but this is just the nature of public education, that I was told repeatedly to make sure my lessons were rigorous, right? There's that buzzword that we hear all over public ed, please make sure your lessons are rigorous, you must have rigor. And I would say, but what is rigor? And they would be like, you just need it, you need rigor, make sure you have rigor. And they could never define it. They could never give me a tangible explanation of this buzzword term that really just means challenge. But what is challenge? And isn't that different for different kids and depending on where they're coming from? So I went back to the way that I was taught as a teacher back in undergrad, and I came across this Bloom's taxonomy model that, I was using it to plan lessons all the time. Because it made sense to me, right? This is how our brains work. And really what happened was I wondered what would happen if we handed Bloom's taxonomy over to students and we taught them how their brains worked and we let them be in charge of their thinking and eventually their learning. And it turned out to be kind of revolutionary for me as a teacher. So it made sense to sort of marry that passion about Bloom's with my passion for documentary film. And that's how we got here. So if we can view documentary films through this Bloom's taxonomy lens, we're working in a skill set that teachers kind of know, right? It's how we were raised as educators. It also gives us the proof that we need that documentary film belongs in our classrooms, right? If you have an administrator or a principal or any leader in your building that comes in and observes you, which we all live in that culture, that performance culture, you want to be able to prove that what you are doing with students works, that they are learning. Bloom's taxonomy is your proof, you know? It's rooted in an educational psychology model, and it's strong and firm, and it will not let you down. So that's why we are kind of gonna work through Bloom's to get doc film in your classrooms. So what I'd like to do just really quickly is talk you through the Bloom's taxonomy model. If this is something you're familiar with, that's cool. But I think when we're talking about documentary film, we might need to look at the model again. I think this kind of helps us start to apply these ideas to our own classrooms. So Bloom's taxonomy is actually pretty simple. Like you see here on the model, it's a pyramid, right? And it's this simple idea that our brains take in new information in levels. And this is true for all students. We all possess these levels. I don't care where you are, and I've taught students from all different levels and all different backgrounds, so I know that to be true. Even our highest kids still need time at those lower levels. You know, we start with remember, very simple things like definitions, listing things, memorizing. All of that is very low level learning. You move up to understand, where you might start describing that learning a little bit more. When we get into apply or application, students can give examples about their learning. They can start to talk to you about it with more detail. And then we get to the fun levels, which, I mean, that's my teacher nerd coming out, but I love these upper levels because they're made for documentary film. Like these upper levels are film analysis, and your kids can be film critics, you know? We just have to empower them with the language to do that. And Bloom's taxonomy will give them that language. So we look at analyze, where they start to break things apart, and they might compare and contrast different parts of the film, or the music that's used in the film. You can go in so many directions at analyze. From there, evaluate. You see our students can make arguments or perhaps defend the filmmaker's perspective. The possibilities there are pretty incredible. And then lastly, we get to create, where they maybe are designing a sequel to the film, or they're creating a different trailer for the film, or maybe they're changing one piece of that film and then looking at how that affects the whole. That's a pretty fantastic level as well. So this is our model, and I think you can kind of see why. But what I want us to focus on, and one of the resources that will be posted on the webinar page following this, is this idea of verbs, because our kids really understand this, right? When I teach this to kids, I tell them, like, your brain learns in levels. I don't care how intelligent you are, or how silly or stupid you think you are, which, you know, we don't ever want our kids to feel that way, but some of them do. You all possess the capacity to learn in levels and to progress up these levels. The pace that kids move through these levels is the only thing that changes. So my very smart kids, my very, very gifted kids that have all of this natural ability and intelligence, they still need time in these lower levels. They still need the new information. They still need to understand the characters or the subjects in the documentary, where the film is coming from, some background information. They may progress through that pretty quickly to get into analysis and evaluation, but just because they're high does not mean that they don't still need those lower levels. On the flip side, this is incredibly powerful for our students who have lost confidence in themselves. And I know that to be true because that's kind of how I got into teaching documentary film myself. My first year here in Durham, I was teaching 8th grade language arts, and I had a wonderful group of students who challenged me every single day. And they never doubted that I loved them. Like, they definitely knew that I did, but they also knew that they made my life pretty tough. It was an honest struggle, but we were in it together, and therefore it like really grew me as an educator. But what happened was I could not get them to settle into 8th grade text. We were supposed to be studying a unit on the civil rights movement, and specifically the Greensboro 4, and I couldn't get them to dig in, and I didn't understand why. Like, to me, the text was really great. It was nonfiction, it actually happened. Greensboro is not far from Durham. Like, why isn't this more relevant to you? And I figured out it was because they couldn't comprehend the text. I had students in my room that could not read at the 8th grade. So what do you do, right? I had an administrator at the time who told me to try something else and suggested February 1, which is an incredible documentary about the Greensboro Four. And so I didn't change any of my lesson plans. I kept my questions. I kept my plans. And they were based on Bloom's. Those high-level questions were in, right? Like, I didn't take those out, and I didn't lower my expectations because I knew my students could do it. I knew it was in them because these levels are in all of our students. And sure enough, they bit into that film like it was, made for them. And they could do all of those high-level tasks that, like, just the day before with a piece of paper and words in front of them, they couldn't do. So here they are engaging in critical thinking that I can prove because I have the Bloom's taxonomy model behind me as my proof. And they're into this film, and the conversations that are coming out of their mouths, it just wouldn't have happened if I had never sort of gone into documentary film. It is a bridge to literacy because after the film, they wanted the text, right? It was still a struggle. We still had to work through all of these reading comprehension issues, which plague so many of our students all over our country. But the film made them want to try again. And that's just really powerful. So ever since then, it's been a vital part of what I do as a teacher. And I really believe that Bloom's taxonomy is kind of the route to making this a part of your classroom. So we want to talk about kind of how Bloom's comes to life in documentary film resources. For me, when I was first getting started, especially teaching February 1, I knew that I needed my students to have proof that they were doing all of this high-level learning and that they were engaged in critical thinking. I didn't know much at the time about viewing guides, but I knew a lot about study guides, right? Like, we create study guides for every unit that we teach. So the Bloom's taxonomy viewing guide kind of came from that thinking that students need a structured assignment to sort of document this learning up these levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And that's what our viewing guide does. It breaks your film into 3 parts. And in just a couple minutes, we're going to take a look at an example of what I'm speaking of right now. But we want kids to analyze and evaluate and sort of dig into film before they kind of dive into the storyline of the film, during the film, and then after. So those are the 3 main components of a viewing guide. I think that this is the simple sort of foundational starter tool that is the best way to get your feet wet with integrating documentary film in your classroom. There are a ton of wonderful resources out there once you feel confident, and PBS POV has so many of them, and I can't wait to share those with you. But when we're just getting started, I really recommend that you start with a viewing guide that is rooted in Bloom's taxonomy, just so that you can prove and document that learning that your students are going to be doing. So we try to use those verbs that sort of align with each level of Bloom's throughout the viewing guide to sort of show how your students are progressing through those levels of learning. And again, it goes back to this idea of proof, which I wish that we didn't have to prove to leaders in our buildings or district folks that we were doing what we needed to do for students, but the fact of the matter is we just do. And if you're going to use a lot of time in a class period, especially for a full-length film, you have to be able to back that up. And your viewing guides from your students, when they're complete, will back you up because they're rooted in Bloom's taxonomy. So that learning is visible to anyone, including your students, most importantly, your students. So as they progress through the guide, the thinking becomes more critical, the questions become more complex. It kind of has built-in differentiation in that sense, meaning that, like, if you don't think your students are ready to go to those very high levels, you might just have them start by doing, the first 2 sections where they look and activate critical thinking before the viewing of the film, and then they work on some analysis during the film, but maybe we save the after piece for when they're ready. There is built-in differentiation, and the other resource that we're going to give you today is a template that is in doc format so that you can edit it and tweak it for your own needs, so that if our format doesn't work or you don't want to use our film, which is Brooklyn Castle, I highly recommend that film. It's awesome. But that way you can take the template and make it your own so that it's worthwhile for you and your students. So we like the template too because it does provide a scaffold, and it kind of takes the guesswork out of how you integrate a full-length film into your classroom. It gives you a guide, it really is meant for your students, but as you prepare to teach this film and engage your students this way, I think the viewing guide is really powerful. And it kind of anchors you as an educator and lets you know that you are on the right path with this. So now we're going to take a look at that viewing guide. This viewing guide is for Brooklyn Castle, which is an incredible documentary film. It is the film for our youth screening this year, and kids love it. It is also available through PBS and POV, and I highly recommend it, just if you're thinking about a documentary film that might work across curriculum and across grade levels. This is definitely an honest choice. So we're going to just kind of dive into walking through this viewing guide. As I mentioned, we've got 3 big chunks. Each one is going to intentionally activate these levels of Bloom's taxonomy, and you're going to be able to see that. So as you are thinking about how you might create a viewing guide for your students, you just need to know that if you stick to those verbs that are associated with the levels of Bloom's, and you start to be really mindful and very intentional about the levels of learning that you're asking your students to engage in, you'll be fine. The structure of our template, I think, really lends itself to you making it your own. And I think as we walk through this, it'll become a little bit more clear on how you might do that. So I like before the film to sort of just dive right into some big questions. Our first big question here is, what do you think the purpose of an education is? And just a little bit of background, Brooklyn Castle is about an inner city chess team that kind of go really far, but like struggle and overcome that struggle, and are just really wonderful examples of like what happens when you keep things like chess in schools. Very inspiring, works with all different kinds of curriculum. I do it with middle school students, but we've seen it be really successful with high school students as well. But they really look at like education as a whole, and if this is a system, if public ed is a system that's actually working for kids. So right out the gate, you're going to ask your kids what they think the purpose of school is, which that's a huge question. Definitely high level, but definitely a question that every single one of your students has an opinion about, because they go to they take part in their education, every single day. Like, you can't get any more close to home than that. So then we immediately engage them in analysis by looking just at the title. So here we are again, where we are going to ask every kid in the room, regardless of level, to analyze the title of the film, which is Brooklyn Castle. So I'm asking you to do this high-level thing, but my text is 2 words long, right? So you're having kids break this down. You're having them think about it deeply, but it's 2 words. Every kid in your room is capable of analysis. So why don't we show them that right from the gate so that they feel empowered to continue in the viewing guide? From there, we like to do a personal connection question where they're reflecting on their own school experience. And again, like, all of our students have very strong feelings, for better or for worse, about their experience in school. So that's our before the film. Again, diving into some higher level stuff right out the gate, but also having them connect personally so that they're ready to watch the film. The second chunk is our during the film graphic organizer, where kids are analyzing what they see, what they hear, and what they're thinking, just kind of as they are viewing the film. You have some prompting questions here that you could delete if you didn't want them and you wanted kids to come up with their own observations. But these prompting questions are really nice scaffolds as well. So if you've never had a kid analyze film as they watch film, it's helpful to have these scaffolding questions just to like get their minds in the routine of diving into what they're seeing and hearing and thinking about. So after that, you have some I think these are pretty basic questions, providing your kids know these terms. And you might do a quick review just to make sure. I would even give them a word bank with definitions if that was something that they struggled with, but I really think kids can do this. Again, they're looking at characters. Well, these are actual human beings, obviously, in a documentary film, but kids know characters, so they make that connection really easily, which I think then makes the analysis that comes later a bit simpler for them. Then they look at major conflicts, and then they look at major settings. So that's during the film. So this analysis is happening sort of as they're watching the film. You do want to be really mindful of the lighting in your room and maybe even chunking what you're showing, right? So when we think about students, like I have 6th graders, and I know that I can talk at my 6th grade children for about 10 minutes, and then they don't hear anything that I say. They want to, like they're pretty fantastic human beings, but after 10 minutes, they're done. They're like looking at the ceiling, starting to poke their neighbor, make some rough choices, all that stuff. So maybe if you're showing a film, you're stopping it every so often, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever works for your age group, just to give them time to dive into this analysis. That is totally fine to chunk the film, and I would highly recommend it. Even as adults, like I do a whole lot better if I get breaks to do some thinking rather than just sit and watch, right? When we just sit and watch for extended periods of time, we tend to not be able to engage our analysis and evaluation skills as effectively. I think that's true for all of us, whether you're a student or a teacher. Great, and then the last part, which is your after the film. So we return to those question categories that we saw in the before the film section, a personal reflection. We want like a gut response to what they saw as soon as it ends. And then we have a text connection question, which this is my English teacher shining through, but I just love the idea of pairing film with text. It definitely works. Again, if we see documentary film as text, this is just another source that you're adding to complement what you're teaching. So you have a quote here from Albert Einstein about chess that ties in very well to the film. And then they're doing some analysis and evaluation on the quote versus what they saw and experienced in the film. And then again, and I love this one, we return to that title analysis question, and we have them go back and look at what they thought the title meant at the very beginning of the viewing guide, way before they even saw the film. And then they're going to examine that title through the eyes of each subject or character in the film. So that's some pretty powerful evaluation. Like, how would Alexis or Rochelle or the assistant principal in the film, how would they describe their Brooklyn Castle, which is the title of our film? So you also have a question here on your Filmmakers Purpose, which I really love the idea of using documentary film to teach perspective or bias or point of view. All of those concepts just sort of hover around critical thinking in ways that are so engaging and so important. And in this day and age, when we talk about things like fake news, it's really important to get our kids to think about why people do things the way that they do. And documentary filmmakers are very intentional with how they tell a story. So you have that Filmmakers Purpose question to get kids to kind of think about it from a different perspective. And then lastly, we have an extension assignment where I've pulled a poem, that complements the film really well. And we're having kids sort of engage in some real English standards and some real analysis and evaluation of this text. But again, it's paired with our documentary film. And the reason this prompt works so well is because documentary film is live text. It has the same layers and complexities as a beautiful poem or a novel or a short story or a news article. You can pair it with all kinds of things. Even that boring textbook that you probably shouldn't be using anymore anyway. We're good. Oh, sorry. After the poem, you have a writing prompt. So if you wanted to take it even further, you could do that. So there's a whole sort of essay around this, or culminating product around the viewing guide as well. So again, we're going to give you, you have a copy of the Brooklyn Castle viewing guide for your use, and I'm about to show you some PBS POV resources that will help you take it even further if you want to use that film. However, if you're like, Brooklyn Castle doesn't really work for me, I'm a science teacher, I'm really looking for something on glaciers or whatever that works in your curriculum, you can still use our viewing guide template, and that's going to be made available to you in doc format so that you can edit it and make it your own. And all of that's on the webinar page through our FullFrame site. So you can grab those now or later. Yeah, so all of that will be there for you. I think I've also posted a list of those verbs, those Bloom's Taxonomy verbs that we talked about earlier. If nothing else, just really start thinking about the questions that you ask students every day. Part of my learning with Bloom's, I did like a question audit where I just every day tracked every question I asked every kid. And I realized that by 3 p.m., which is when our school day ends here in Durham, I had only asked students remember and understand level questions. What? Like, how many opportunities do we miss to engage kids in critical thinking? So Bloom's is really powerful, obviously within the realm of documentary film and utilizing it as a tool in our viewing guide, but just as educators, I think we really need to spend some time back with those verbs and then teach those verbs and those levels to our students so that they start to build those really crucial metacognitive skills where they learn to think about their thinking and own their learning process so that they can then kind of push themselves and challenge themselves as they move through their education. So we have additional resources for Brooklyn Castle, and this is kind of our wonderful transition to the bounty of free resources that are made available to all of you and to educators across the country through PBS's POV. So you can take a look at the resources for Brooklyn Castle here, and you'll see like there's an incredible discussion guide that centers around the film. You have lesson plans, you have more information about your characters, your filmmaker. The possibilities here are really endless. And I think these are powerful. I think that you could build entire units that begin with a viewing guide and then extend and are enriched by all of these POV resources. So that's Brooklyn Castle. And that kind of is a wonderful transition to this incredible partnership that FullFrame and POV have embarked upon, and I'm so thrilled to be part of. So this is our newest education initiative at FullFrame, and we are partnering with PBS's POV to help get the word out and sort of extend and enrich the reach of these awesome documentary resources that are available on their website and through their community network, which is how you can get films sent to you for free. And this is sort of incredible. I like to think about it as like a free Netflix account for teachers where you can go online and there are not only these incredible resources around these films, but you, like with a few clicks of a button, can request to have that film sent to your school where you can screen it and engage with your kids around it for as long as you need. Also, if you already have a copy of the film or you're going to access it another way, I will also mention now that a lot of these films that really come to life particularly well in middle school and high school classrooms are available via streaming sites. PBS POV streams some as well, but the idea of a physical DVD coming to my school and being the thing that replaces that textbook that wasn't really working for my students to begin with, it's just really appealing to me. So we want to spend some time here taking a closer look at those resources, and I'd love to show you how you can sign up to be part of their community network as an educator and gain access to their lending library so that you can request films for your own classroom. So this is the community network page. In the right-hand sort of middle of that page, there is a sign-up box, and you're going to want to do that. Maybe now, maybe later, but this is how you get access to their fantastic lending library. The sign-up process is incredibly easy. You give them some basic information about who you are, where you teach, what your purpose is for using their wonderful resources. Then you're accepted, and then you have full access to request films and to use all of their resources. So this is the community network. If you're interested in the lending library to access films, you have to sign up through this site. And I highly recommend that you do. Okay. This is the POV Educator site. If you are not looking for a physical copy of the DVD for the film that you want to use, this is a great one-stop shop for resources that, again, will sort of bring these films to life in your classrooms. PBS POV have hired incredible curriculum experts, and the stuff is really solid. You get lesson plans, you get unit plans, you get discussion guides. They even give you a list of texts that will complement the film, which I think is amazing. They basically do all of our work for us. And I think it's done in a way where you can take what they've given you and easily make it work and make it fit for your students in your classroom. So what I love about this page too is that you can search by subject, and there are a ton of subjects that go way beyond ELA and math and science and social studies. So things like technology or engineering, like very specific subjects. I've worked a lot with teachers in my school district recently, and I've found that I get a lot of teachers that teach things like robotics or medical mysteries or all different kinds of things that are looking to supplement their curriculum with documentary film, because again, the textbooks that they're being given to teach these subjects are just not working. So it's awesome that you can search by subject here because you can really access all kinds of things. You can also search by grade level, which is important when you're thinking about appropriate content for middle schoolers versus high schoolers. And then there's a really awesome keyword box where if you know that you're looking for something to complement the unit that you're teaching on Syria in your history classroom, you can type in Syria and you can see the wide array of films that POV has here for us as teachers. So that's that website. So I think that we're wrapping up here. We're going to talk through some next steps, and then I'm so excited to hear questions and talk through kind of where to go from here. So the first thing is that we want to reiterate that you should absolutely sign up for the PBS POV Community Network. It's absolutely worth your time, and again, it gives you access to that free lending library and wonderful resources that, again, once you get your feet wet and you really give these viewing guides a try, the possibilities for documentary film in your classroom are kind of endless. So we really recommend that you sign up for that, and it's so easy. You should do that like now or when this ends. And then after that, you can also take a look at the educator site through POV, try to find some films that you think might fit what you're trying to do in your classroom. And I would really recommend, like, as an educator, if you're not watching right now with either a film in mind or a topic that you know you have to teach and you know you have to cover, but you don't really know kind of how to do that, or maybe it's a subject that's always really hard for kids to grasp, and you think doc film could be the thing that really helps them get it for the first time. If you're not sitting here like that, I would just encourage you to explore that educator site and get to know the wide array of films that are posted there. Because as you look at those, and this is kind of how I do it and what I recommend, as you look at those and you think about your classroom and you think about your kids, films will start to pop up. I am about to start our documentary unit in my classroom, and I'm so excited. This year it's a Global Perspectives project where kids are going to tackle major global issues, but they're going to use documentary film to sort of research and understand kind of how the world is viewing that issue. So I'm going to let my students dive into these POV resources on their own and just see what happens. But I'm pretty excited about it. I think that it's a wonderful lens to view the world. And my kids are very excited too. So the other thing we'd love for you to do is check out the resources for this webinar that are posted to the FullFrame website. Again, you'll find a copy of the Bloom's Taxonomy Viewing Guide for Brooklyn Castle that we spent some time talking through today. You'll also find a blank copy of the Bloom's Taxonomy Viewing Guide template that you can edit and make your own. And then I've also included a list of those really powerful transformational Bloom's verbs that you can put in the hands of your students as you teach them kind of how to navigate their own thinking and learning. The other thing that I want to say before we dive into questions is that if you're sitting here right now and you're like, man, this sounds great, but I really think that a full-length film is too much for me to take on right now, you're not alone. I taught February 1 when I started this 5 years ago. I taught it in chunks over several days, and it probably took longer than it should have, but it was honest, and it's how I learned how to teach documentary film, right? As educators, we have to be fearless. Like, we have to be willing to try new things to meet the needs of our kids. I often feel like it's throwing things at a wall and seeing what sticks, and the longer you're a teacher, the more in control of that process you are in terms of like what sticks and what doesn't. But I am sitting here today, and as a teacher, I can tell you that documentary film will stick, and it can make a true difference in your classroom. So don't be afraid. Try things. Try shorts. Documentary shorts are a great starting point. Even trailers can engage kids in critical thinking in really powerful ways, or just snippets or chunks of films. And POV does an incredible job of just giving you clips that align with lesson plans. They've really set you up for success. So hopefully today was helpful for you. We're going to look at some questions now. It looks like there are a lot, which is really exciting. I kind of forgot that people were out there. So thank you for that, and thanks for being here today. So I'll just read our first question. What are some starter films to get me going with documentary film in my classroom? So I'm going to go back to February 1 because it was so transformational for me. And I know with certainty that like the civil rights movement is something that should and will hopefully always be taught in our classrooms. So it's very much rooted in content. And it is powerful. It works with our viewing guide template really well. And students engage with it very well. So I will recommend February 1 for sure. I will also tell you that If You Build It is really powerful, and that's a film that I taught for several years through my elective. And it's incredible and also deals with public education, and it takes place in Bertie County, North Carolina, and you can kind of take a look about the rest of the film on your own, but it's so good, and it works really well in science classrooms. It would work in an English classroom. It would work in a history classroom that wants to look at like economic growth and development. And then it also works in STEM classrooms and robotics classrooms and engineering classrooms. So the possibilities for that are kind of endless. And again, that's If You Build It. And then a film that's really near and dear to my heart and is one of my favorite films that I've ever seen at FullFrame is Sunita. And it centers around a young girl that just, I don't want to give too much away. You should just all watch Sunita. But it works really well, again, in history classrooms, in social studies rooms, obviously, English classrooms. Like, it works in several places. And she, as a subject, is just dynamic and relatable and relevant. So again, that's Sunita. So that's a couple that I think would get anyone started. I'll also, again, direct you back to those PBS POV resources, because for PBS POV to include a film, they've already thought about what it's going to look like in a classroom. Like, they've done that for you. So you really just need to go with your curriculum in mind and your goals as a teacher for your students in mind, and just see what jumps out at you, and try to imagine how it might come to life for your students. Thanks, that was great. So we also have, what does this look like in terms of differentiation in a classroom? How do you meet the needs of gifted learners and below grade level learners through documentary film? So I kind of spoke a bit about this, but I do think it's worth revisiting, so thanks for asking. I think for our high level students, we always want them thinking about why things are the way they are and what changes when a part changes and how that might affect the whole. You can do that with documentary film very easily because you have this narrative structure, even though you're dealing with like nonfiction, which is super powerful. So you're still in this comforting place of a story. Like you still have a plot, but you can pick that plot apart and analyze that plot and evaluate that plot in the same ways that you look at nonfiction texts and articles. So for our high-level kids, I recommend you take that entire viewing guide, and they do that thing start to finish, all the way through the extension, through the writing prompt. And then you go ahead and dive into some of those POV resources. I think you'll find that they differentiate really well for high ability kids all the way down to students that are struggling. So that's the gifted side. Again, I don't even know who this works best for. I think it works for all kids, and that's why I can't decide. In terms of empowering your students that are struggling academically, documentary film is where it's at. What you are doing for those students, especially when you take the time to teach them outright the language and the verbs associated with those Bloom's Taxonomy levels of learning, when you do that, you show them that they can, right? You show them that they are capable of the same learning and the same academic success as any of their peers. That's transformative for a kid, And I don't think you can deny that. I lived it, so I know that. And it does translate to things like standardized tests, which I know is another concern of all of us in public education. But it does. Critical thinking skills, the routine of understanding Bloom's and moving through levels and constantly being aware of where your learning is, being able to speak with the verbs that demonstrate that learning, being able to, with support, write using those verbs to demonstrate that learning. When you teach kids those critical thinking routines, even your students who are struggling academically can succeed. And more importantly, way more importantly than their test scores, by the way, don't even get me started on that. A lot matters more than test scores. But even more importantly, you're empowering them to own their learning and to sort of take it back from this society that says if you can't read a textbook, you are not smart. That is not true. Documentary film can prove otherwise for those students. So I encourage you to use it with all of your kids. And just, again, be fearless. Hand it to them, teach them Bloom's, and see what happens. If they bomb it, then you figure out how to fix it so that they don't bomb it again. It's a win-win situation. Great, so we have another question. How do you fund the various aspects of FullFrame's education programs? Screening and transportation reimbursement, Teach the Teachers, and School of Doc. We have incredible grants that fund us, including one from the Academy, which is really incredible. And there are a lot of people in our community, but also in the country that have reached out to us and want to help fund education through documentary film. This is something that FullFrame is doing that everyone should be doing. And as a public education teacher, I can't stress that enough. I'm very fortunate to be where I am. This is kind of a dream job, I thought I had my dream job when I was teaching, and I kind of do, but now I have 2 dream jobs, and that's amazing. But part of that is that I work for a festival that is led by someone that is an advocate for public schools. And because of that, she goes out and campaigns for us and brings us back all these wonderful grants that keep us in business. And we are so fortunate. I feel like Teach the teachers, we pay for substitutes so that these teachers can leave classrooms. And I'm sure all of you are the same, but like for me to be out of school is way more work than for me to just go to school, right? So I'm sure we've all done that thing where you're so deathly ill, but you're not going to take a day off of work because it's more work to be away from your students than it is to just suck it up and go in. Teach the teachers makes it so easy. Like they'll pay for your sub, so that you can be away for a few days and build your capacity as a professional educator. It's an incredible gift, which I think is worth way more than the price that we pay to reimburse subs, but it really is powerful. And the same thing goes with reimbursing transportation costs for buses. That's unheard of. Like, we don't have free field trips. That's not a thing that I have seen in 12 years of education. It's really difficult. Places might give you free admission, but they're not going to then take it a step further and pay for your transportation. FullFrame means it, they're true advocates for public ed, and I personally just want to see other film festivals and other, entities kind of step up, right? Because there are public schools all over the country that could use the same advocacy and support for teachers and students. Thank you. Okay. So we just kind of want to close now and just also mention that the School of Doc is also funded through grants. It's generously supported by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the Baskerville Fund, at the Triangle Community Foundation, the Finhagen Family and Helens Fund, IBM, and then our Mary Duke Biddle Foundation. So again, that's that incredible wealth of support that comes from our Durham community, which I really believe this to be the best city in the world, but I'm a little biased. I'll also tell you that we've had incredible support for Teach the Teachers from Alan Teasley, who's been such a mentor and support for so many of our teachers that come through our program. So we have really incredible support, and I don't take that lightly at all. We would not be here today without all of those funds from all of those really generous people that believe in public schools. Okay, do we have any last questions? Awesome. So thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I am a school teacher, so I taught all day as well, and if you're hanging out with us right now, you probably did too, or you're still teaching, so bless you if you are. Thank you for all the work that you do in public schools. I'm right there in the trenches with you, and it's not an easy fight, but it's an important fight, and it's a fight that I think documentary film can really help us with. So thank you for being here today. Have a wonderful afternoon. Feel free to reach out. You can find me via email, and that's on the FullFrame website. It's education@fullframefest.org. And I would love to hear from you and help you sort of bring documentary film to life in your classrooms. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.